Welcome to Masters of Influence, a premier video show where we share the success journeys of leaders in their field and learn about those pivotal moments and decisions that shape their paths to prominence. I'm your host, Nancy Erickson. I work with high net worth individuals, CEOs, and business leaders, and I give them a white glove, really hands-on experience to write, edit, publish, market, and distribute their books worldwide. I'm the owner of Stonebrook Publishing, an award-winning publishing house that publishes nonfiction works. Today, my esteemed guest is Gary Wilson. Gary is a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point. After serving in the military and getting a couple of graduate degrees, he joined the Salvation Army and moved up its ranks to become a commander. Using the skills he learned in the military and the Salvation Army, he brought those skills to business and is now the CEO of Heads Up Leading. Gary believes that everything rises and falls on leadership and believes that every one of us has the capacity to lead well if we're willing to learn how to do so. And that's what he helps people do. Gary, welcome.
Nancy, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm still always in awe of all the things you have going on and the things you allow folks to accomplish. So thank you for this time to share a little bit with each other.
Yeah, well, I just really like to highlight people. So there's a lot of good going on happening out in the world. And you might not know that unless you have the opportunity to meet people like you. So we want to talk a little bit about what you're doing. So tell us a little bit about your growing up years. Where are you from and what was your family life like?
I was really fortunate to have a great family life. Grew up in a small town in Tuscumbia, Alabama. High school class, probably 140, 150 people, just a much smaller than what my children went through years later.
Yeah.
So I realized it was a neat place. It was an opportunity to, I loved athletics. I enjoyed school. I enjoyed my friends. And did not realize how many leadership opportunities I had as a kid, but I was fortunate because I could play sports, to be a pitcher, to be a quarterback, to do those things that I realize now as I look back, gave a lot of opportunity for me to grow in my physical abilities. But it was the trip from there to West Point, that large jump from just being a kid to suddenly realizing that somebody's had much greater expectations of me. It caused me to have to ratchet up my whole life. But my parents were fantastic folks. They both very steady. My dad came off a farm. Both parents came off a farm. Mom was a family of sharecroppers, probably 11, 12, 13 kids at different times on the farm. My dad grew up in a similar sized family on a farm over in Belgreen, Alabama. So hardworking parents who taught us good things. I tell people that most drill sergeants would never have scared me. My dad was pretty straightforward about the work he expected me to get done. So learning to work to a certain level, learning to work to a particular level was not something I had to learn at West Point.
It wasn't
no, ma'am, it was not.
Well, tell us a little bit about that process of getting into West Point, because clearly you were a golden boy if you were a pitcher and the quarterback of the football team, and you had to have good grades to be considered as a candidate. So, and I believe a congressperson has to nominate you. Is that right?
They did. And, I never studied hard enough to be the very top person in my class, but I was lucky enough to be in the top 20 or so always. And at the same time, the athletics did a lot for me as far as just learning to be with people to get things done. The whole process was actually somebody came into the school and pulled three of us out of class and said, "Hey, you guys and gals all have." At that time, it was only guys going in.
Guys, yeah.
It was they were saying, "You have some of the things we think would be handy here." The football coaches came and talked to me quite honestly, and that, if anything, pushed me over the edge. Being the oldest of five kids. Hearing the possibility of free education, the fact that they might actually let me play some more football in my life, and then I only had to give them 5 years in return, just didn't seem that daunting at the moment. I did not get in until the very end. It was late May. I got in on what I consider an alternate appointment. The congressman had sent the stuff forward, but they had enough people. Suddenly they didn't have enough people. And all of a sudden, just a few days before my high school graduation, I found out that I'd been offered the opportunity. And it was just too good of a deal to not give it a try. And somebody from my high school.
It's such an honor.
It was a unique thing, and we'd only had one or two people from our high school ever go, and nobody ever had the opportunity to finish. And
Oh,
so not only was I excited about getting to go, but once I got there, I have to admit, in the back of my mind was that little piece. I'd like to be the first one to see if I can't make it through this. And
yeah.
little thoughts like that, I suspect, helped me when I found out I struggled with the dean, because I had to learn how to study, and that was a very daunting task those first 2 years.
I imagine. So what was it like in the academy? I mean, it's an elite, prestigious place, but there are also some real brainiacs there, and I understand
Yeah,
that academics are really rigorous.
they in those
Not to
days.
mention all the military drills and,
I think my salvation there, Nancy, was, again, there was a lot of sports opportunity too. I never did play football there. It took me a couple of years to get to the point I was settled academically enough that I could actually. I played rugby for a couple of years,
Mhm.
but the opportunities every semester, once or twice a semester, you had opportunities to participate with your company in team sports,
Mhm.
and that became a real outlet for me, because the poor study habits. Uh, that a high school sometimes allows. If you happen to be capable of memorizing a lot and
Yes.
reading fast, I love to read. Those two things did me well in high school. They
But
didn't do me so well there when suddenly they overloaded me with all the knowledge that PLEP is required to know, all the activities. Plus, you go through, I think I realize, I reflect back, we graduated with like 150 something credits. I'm just totally off the chain of what anybody would ever think about getting through. You normally did 20 hours plus a semester
mhm.
there, and they were intense hours. There was a lot
Yeah.
of, if you ever went to math class there, you took boards almost every day and stood up in front of your peers and wrote answers. Developed the math problem on the board and showed how you came to. I was not good at that, showing how I came to conclusions. I could do it better in my head than I could show it on a board. And
Yeah.
so the smarts helped me. The smarts did not help me. I had to learn that there was a lot more required if I was going to keep up with all those different fronts. Plus, trying to be a good cadet.
Yeah.
You talked about the marching and all those things. You're learning how to be a young leader. One, first, how to be a good performer as a freshman, but then in your next 3 years, you'll spend time learning to move up and be responsible for 2 people, then 10 people, then 30 people or more. And that was a great learning experience. That part I really learned to like. By my junior year, I realized I like this stuff. I like being part of what other
Leadership. Yeah.
people are doing.
Yeah.
I did. I didn't even stop to wrap my mind around the fact that that was the term. I just realized I
Yeah.
really enjoyed it
You liked
as a
it. Yeah.
group. Yeah, that's
So
right.
when you graduated, you had 5 years of military service, correct? What did
Right.
what did you do then, Gary?
I was very, very blessed to have the opportunity. I went to Fort Stewart, Georgia. I served as an infantry platoon leader twice. I was part of a class that was broken up in 3 different segments, and I was the last group to actually go over to my basic course. So I was in my unit before I ever went to the basic course out of West Point for about 90 days, which was a fantastic a learning opportunity. The captain I worked for at that time was really hard nosed, very straight laced, but at the same time, he was a great teacher.
Mm.
And so he just really ramped up my game again of what it's like to be. I was the, you figure at 22, I was sort of the middle age in the group. There was all the NCOs were older, but most of the young soldiers were 18 to 20, a little younger than me.
Mhm.
And when I rolled into that group, the sergeant said, "Look, that he's an intellect. We need you to go to the meetings for us and make sure you get what the heck it is he's saying and bring it back to us and tell us what it is, because we can do whatever it is you want us to do, but we need to know what in the world is it he really
Know
wants us
what
to
it
do."
is, right?
So I became a facilitator, an interpreter, and that was actually what a great learning experience that was, because once or twice they hung me out to dry as they sort of had an idea, but they let me go off my goofy lieutenant ways. But they also always had my back, and I got to come back after my basic course to do another platoon, and that was a neat thing to get to have one to go to school and learn some things I should have already understood a little better, and then come back and apply it again the second time. I only got to do that for a short period of time before I became an executive officer in a company, and then that led to being in motor pools and everything else, and so I started learning a whole different facet of the Army at that time.
Yeah. So then you retired after 5 years, so to speak, right? And then what was your first job?
Well, I spent 20 and a half years in the military.
Oh my gosh, I had no idea.
I actually retired from the military at 20 and a half years. And so I had wonderful jobs in the military. I was just reflecting back through the other day from company command in the old guard. If you've ever seen the old guard in Washington, D.C., what a neat experience that was. I met all the famous generals at that time, got to meet President Reagan, got to be involved in the Vietnam internment. All those things were just such highlights of life. That led from there to a grad degree and then on to West Point to be a TAC officer with cadets. So I was back teaching cadets how to be cadets and young officers, just exactly. And the TAC officer that I had when I was a cadet had made a real significant impact on myself and my wife. As we saw him and his wife, he was really known for being extremely high expectations of us. He was held us very accountable, and at the same time, you'd go to his house and they were so personable.
Yeah.
And that taught us the type of leadership. I've talked to you before about the caring, competence, and character aspects of leadership, but the caring piece is something I learned at West Point through this couple.
Wow.
Because they knew how to balance the being a real high expectation, high accountability, high achieving team person, leader, and at the same time be a person. And I didn't see that always. One of the things I learned at West Point at the time was I'm not going to be this leader. I'm going to be that leader. I wanted to be the leader who cared for their people. That by nature fit with me and how I was raised. It fit with my heart. But it took getting out of there and going out to my platoon and going back to basic course and some things to learn. I had to really step up the competence piece. There's a lot of things as a young leader in the military that carried through all my 20 plus years, where I realized every time I took a new role, I stepped up in responsibility more than anything. And as I stepped up in that responsibility, with that responsibility normally came the need to learn some new competencies. And because, what got you there, it won't necessarily allow you to be very good where you got to.
That's right.
And wow, that was a really eye-opening thing for 20 plus years, and even more so when I stepped away. I left the military. I had a fantastic job. My last job was a G3 for a Corps Support Command. I'm working for a one-star general. I got a chance to do that for 2 or 3 generals. I learned a ton from those guys. And the only reason I stepped away is my wife and I both at that time realized that we'd both had a call to go into ministry. Mm-hmm. And the Salvation Army doors open to us to serve in their drug and alcohol recovery centers, which my wife had actually served in years before while we were in Washington, D.C. And that was a real, that was the first in my life I ever, somebody told me, said, Gary, you'll know you're ready to go do something like that when you get up every morning and say, Lord, the answer is yes. What's the question?
Tell us about the Salvation Army. What's the mission? And what, I think everybody's heard of it and they know the bell ringers at Christmas time. Right. But tell us what the essence of the Salvation Army is.
Salvation Army wants to serve people where they have needs at without discrimination. A lot of folks don't realize that about them, but the Salvation Army does the great disaster work. They have social services in every major city. They have social services in most of the small towns. Salvation Army is about as well spread in this country and around the world. I think 130 countries now the Salvation Army is actually active in. The headquarters is out of London, England. You get a real funny flavor there. You get the European view of liberalism versus conservatism. You got the United States version of that. So sometimes those things, there's some ebb and flow between the United States and the rest of the Salvation Army. But the honest answer is the United States, because of the good hearts of the people of the United States, gives the majority of the money to support so much of the rest of the world's missions that's going on. So happened the specific part my wife and I got into was residential recovery centers. It's a place where there's program, there's spiritual aspects, there's residential life, and then there's the operations leading to the finances. So that the business piece of that was the next place in life that really set me on. I realized all the leadership stuff I had done prior and had learned and had practiced worked perfectly in the weirdest setting. Most of my workforce, over half of my workforce, more often than not in the 5 centers we were a part of running, was more than 50% made up of folks who were fighting for their life to recover from an addiction. And it's when I started realizing they still needed expectations on their life. They still needed to believe they were part of a team. They needed to believe that we cared for them. There was a lot of things I went in.
Yeah,
it was fascinating. It was a fascinating experience.
Yeah, I think I told you my husband and I are both recovered alcoholics. I've been sober 18 years and he's been sober 38 years. So we do a lot of our time is spent helping people in recovery. And so, but the Salvation Army, a lot of I picture it having like a different clientele. people who are not just alcoholic, but are really down on their luck in other ways too. And that they need housing and they need food and they need, structure and that kind of thing. So I obviously honor that work because, people can get clean and sober. They can.
That's right.
And they do. And they do. It, for some people, it takes a lot of tries, and there's no magic bullet. I can't tell you what, is the thing that works because I don't really know. All I know is I faithfully go to meetings and work with other alcoholics, but it is never too late for somebody to have what we call a spiritual experience, and they can actually turn their lives around and get healthy again.
That's correct. I think I'm so thankful for that you and your husband follow the track you did, because I think you're setting the example of exactly what a recovered life from whatever your issue is in life is. You have to go find a new thing to do, and you have to intentionally grow in that direction, and you never stop growing. You're giving back as part of your growth, and when we could teach somebody, when we could get somebody to grasp that piece, when they could articulate back to me that not only did they understand what their issues were, but this is what they're doing about them. And now I want to help Johnny and Jane and whoever else is following me. When they start realizing the need to give back, I think that's when whether they realize or not, they just step into a leadership role which says, I want to take somebody with me this way.
Yeah.
And what a powerful statement that is by that person.
Yeah.
And I think the programs that you work with already are some of the finest examples of helping people understand we all need some sort of structure, and we also need a community that understands us well enough to know when we're straying from the structure and when we're being faithful. And then they know enough to help promote us within that structure to allow us to help others. And in fact, it was a 12 steps requires of everybody in recovery of whatever form. As you hit that place, you must give back. That's a sustaining part of the force.
Right. Well, so how long were you with the Salvation Army?
We spent 24 years with them. We were employees the first 2.5 years, and the whole time they were asking us if we maybe would want to be officers in that. When we realized that
officer rankings like they did in the U.S. Army, or
they're very, very similar. You come out, if you come through their seminary, you come out as a lieutenant. And you tend to spend 4 or 5 years as a lieutenant. Then they will promote you to captain. You probably spend 6 or 8 or 10 years there until you become a major. Most Salvation Army officers will retire as majors or captains if they came in later. We were very, very blessed. We were basically 3 years as an employee. We actually spent part of that last year as sergeants because we were in training to take over one of the centers. We were then made auxiliary captains because both of us had some education. And we had lots of experience, and I'd already been ordained as a pastor in a Baptist church years prior to that, because stuff we did with young folks, work we did with young people. They let us become what they call auxiliary captains, and so you're a pretend captain for a few years until they can validate or verify that you actually needed to be doing what you're doing. It's a little bit like when I went to grad school at Auburn University. I went on a provisional status because my undergrad grades were the pits. But they passed. They got me out of West Point, and when I found out, and I got to grad school, and I found out quickly myself and another guy made all A's. We both graduated with some whatever honor they have as a master's student. It was a neat experience, but I found out my ability to be a student was much better when I was 27 and 28 than it was when I was 18 to 22. And I'm sorry, I lost track there. Where we were trying to go.
We're just talking about your leadership roles in both you're in the military and in the Salvation Army. Yes. Now, obviously, you have now transitioned and are translating those roles into the business world. So, tell us a little bit about what you do now and how you got into it.
I've known for 2 or 3 years that when the time came, the Salvation Army would tell us to move on at my Social Security age. And I've been very, very blessed for the most part with good health. I had a cancer bout here and there and things like that. But the honest answer, I've been blessed with good health. I love to still work out and stay active. And that allows me I still have quite a bit of energy. And so I have to point that somewhere. And I don't want to play golf 5 days a week as much as I love golf. That's one of my things I really enjoy doing. I like running and working out. But my favorite thing in life is watching the light go on for somebody else. And I do that some with church work, but the honest answer is my real love. In fact, I realized this last year.
What do you mean by that? The light going off?
so often people have a desire to go someplace, to do someplace, and to take folks with them, particularly if they're in a leadership role, but they just can't see through the trees to see where it is.
Mhm.
And if you come alongside as a coach, what you do is you help them understand what are the outcomes they're hoping for. You help them understand about their own awareness of what it is that's actually entailed and try to make that come to pass. And then you start talking, you help them sort of sort through courses of action. And if you can get that, then you come to some sort of agreement. Okay, now that you have these courses of action, let's talk about some accountability about that. Let me know how you feel about maybe next week you do this, and by this month you do this. And if you can get the person to work with you, walking alongside them as a coach like that is a powerful, powerful thing. What you hope for every single session is say, okay, let's talk a few minutes. What did you get out of this session today that's going to make a difference in the next week or two?
Mhm.
And to me, that coaching, I don't mind consulting. If somebody wants me to weigh in and actually have more of a say so, be more directive, I can do that now. I've had the opportunity to be that person in some form or fashion more than 30 times over the last 40, 50 years. So that part doesn't bother me. But quite honestly, the more fun part is to watch that person realize their own capabilities, their own power within themselves and the team they lead.
Mhm.
I love talking to young leaders in particular, but even older leaders, if they'll listen to it, about the fact that you got an inner circle, and those folks are who you rely on. Are you actually paying attention to them? Are they the right people in the right spots? Are they able to give you the input to allow you to make the best decisions? And if so, when you start talking to somebody about things like that, it's a lot of fun because all of a sudden you'll see the light in their eyes. You'll see the little light bulb literally almost over their head go like, oh my gosh, that's so obvious. Yes, it is. What do you think about that? Where do you want to go with that? That to me is more fun than me telling them what to do any day.
Oh yeah, yeah. So like who do you work with? What kind of people do you work with? Where are they in their business cycle?
That's always that honest answer is I can't tell you a pinpoint. I'd love to say I work with them all right at the place where they're ready to start a whole new cycle. Because if you follow the sine curve model, which I happen to follow, they're either on the way up, they're plateaued, or they've already slid off the backside and they're starting to digress. That obviously it creates more of an emergency situation for me when I'm talking to leadership in any organization. If you're on the downslide, what do you think brought you there? And what do you think might be the possibility we can reroute this thing? That normally means you've got leadership changes that need to occur. That normally means maybe a total refinement of the purpose, the mission, so many things. But if you can catch them, the ideal situation is to catch an organization who's been climbing, but they realize they're starting to wonder what's going to be next. And if you can catch them there and start a whole new cycle up from that point, that's ideal. That's when I was very fortunate. The 5 organizations I ran in the Salvation Army out in the field before we actually took over all 21 of them was that when I walked in, sometimes I followed a leader who was actually pretty weak, and sometimes I followed a leader who was pretty darn good. In both situations, in all 5 situations, we had to assess, okay, what are we taking over? Where are they at on the curve? What do we need to impact immediately to make sure that we're actually solidifying anything that may be falling, that may be crumbling? And then what do we do? What's next? What's going to take us up the hill again? What's going to get us started moving again? And when I look at any organization, in fact, I realize now after doing that more than 30 times in my life, I realize I have a bit of a gift, perhaps, or maybe just some understanding of how to help a person assess an organization and then come to some conclusions about the actions that need to be taken. That's a really interesting point for most people because if they've been in leadership very long and if they had that group around very long, there's relationships and ties there. And all of a sudden they realize of the 5 people who surround them, 2 of them really are not getting the job done anymore. So then you end up answering a question about those 2 people. Are we going to find a way to train them? Are they still humble enough to be coachable? Or are you going to have to remove them and put somebody else in place and start with some new persons who can do a better job? That's a hard personal situation for any leader.
It is hard because it's more expensive to go for a new employee than it is to kind of shore
Absolutely.
up. But people have to be teachable and adaptable. If you're not constantly adapting, you aren't gonna be successful.
I
So,
totally agree.
how do people find you to work with you, Gary?
That's something I'm still wrestling with, Nancy, as I go along. The one we got a couple of guys right now we're in a consulting role for, and we seem to have a great relationship with them. I involved my wife right in that whole relationship with those 2 guys because we're talking a bridging between something they're doing in the Salvation Army. And 2 heads are better than one. And my wife has she has the female sensing of the things we've been doing, and I have the other side of that, the male sensing, perhaps is one way to put that. And together we give a better answer to those 2 young guys. People, I have to really guard against this. I get so excited about anything to do with leadership and trying to be successful, and particularly if you're a kind of leader who's willing to go to the trouble to grow the people around you. I'm fired up at that point, and it's like the issue is, how do I not come across as too intense to scare them off? I'm actually working with a couple different organizations right now to try to better my capacity, my ability to reach out and touch the kind of people who would need the help I'm offering to give, and then to help me start bridging that gap better as to how I might talk to them and bring them on board and be helpful. Because my honest desire is, if I don't do anything with this coaching thing, it's not a life failure, but it is something I would greatly like to pass on to people.
Sure.
It's really more of a passion of the heart at this point than it is a need or necessity.
Yeah. Well, invariably, those who have been in business for a while have had some pivotal moments where things could have gone in the wrong direction.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had any moments like that, Gary?
I've had 2 or 3 of those. Getting to go to West Point for me was the real launching pad. There's no doubt about it. As I look back now, I realize my life would have been very different if I'd have gone some other way. So, meeting my wife was obviously another one, because she is a walk-in personality to be reckoned with in all ways, and she makes a big difference in what we do. Career-wise, I was at West Point teaching cadets. I was actually selected to go back to the counseling center. Had also branch transferred at about that same time to go to the logistics arena. And after all that was approved, and it was like it was going to happen, I'd already been accepted 2 or 3 doctoral programs. And then the branch realized, wait a minute, that's not a permanent slot. We can't let you go do that. And they pulled the rug out of that. That really took 2 or 3 days of mind searching and heart searching. It took my wife a week or two, as we realized that was something that would have been a lot of fun. We've enjoyed it. But it also laid out the path that we followed into the logistical arena. And I found out I was probably more gifted in the logistical arena than I even was in the infantry arena. And at least militarily, that really set us up to have some, for me in particular, to have some really neat jobs. I got to have a garrison command in Korea that I might not have ever seen as an infantry officer. I got to go back and be the G3 to 2 different 1-star generals who were really both of them became 3 stars later on. It was very clear that I was very fortunate. Of the 10 or 15 people I worked for in the military, 3 of them turned out to be 3-star generals. So I had some good teachers along the way. So maybe those are, and had no reason to know or believe that at the time. Just,
of course not. Yeah.
But they were, and all 3 of them were considered quirky. All 3 of them were considered hard to work for. And I was thankful. I think this goes back to my dad and my mom a little bit. My sister used to say my dad was too hard on me. And I realized as I look back, yeah, he was hard. But the honest answer was, I faced hard a lot more times in my life. And when I had a chance to face it, it gave me a little thicker skin and ability to do this, I suspect. And I like to win. I like to do well. I'm not one of those competitors that walks away and I'm still grousing 3 weeks later. But if I'm on the field, I'm going 100%. And if I was working for somebody like that, I was trying to give 100% at the time. And those guys taught me a ton. So, and then the realization that I was called into ministry, and then to land in the one place that fit myself and my wife.
Oh yeah,
perfectly.
that's a
that was
there.
That was, in fact, if you look at what happened, and the centers we got to run from the smallest, the roughest one to the largest one.
Wow.
And the good news was, every opportunity we were allowed to have the leeway to make improvements and take all 3 in a very positive direction, all 5 in a positive direction. And then to end up and be responsible and actually to sit on the territorial, the Southeast Corporation level boards, to be a part of the national and international things that were going on. I got a chance to speak at some national things and got a chance to be part of international stuff. Nobody else had ever had that chance to come in the side door like we did and get to have an opportunity to do that. So we retired as lieutenant colonels. There's usually a handful of colonels around the Salvation Army in the United States, and there's a 20 or 22 or 24 kind of lieutenant colonels around. We got to be one of those. That to me showed the hand that God had on that, and the direction, and the things He had taught me before walked us right into that.
Sure.
Down to things as silly as playing the guitar, Nancy. I picked that up back as I was retiring, as I was working with some kids in a church, and I led music. I led bands for the next 20 years in all those different places. So who knows? The trick is keep stepping forward.
Yeah.
and
Just keep moving.
believe positive things are keep trying to do the best you can and keep positive things in front of you. And it's amazing.
So Gary, how would you say you're using your influence to impact the world?
I really, you can say this from a biblical fashion, or you can say this from a purely secular fashion. There are some good values and there's some good principles that if we could all work from those, we'll do good things together if we want to. You know, for it to be a team, you got to learn to trust each other, and everybody's got to be willing to do their part, their gifts, their strength, and they got to go at it hard in their area. But if we work that together, there's almost nothing we can't accomplish.
Yeah. Well, to wrap it up, I want to ask you a few rapid fire questions to help the audience get to know you in a different way. So are you ready?
Okay, let's go for it.
Okay. Cat or dog?
Dog.
Okay. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Summer or winter?
Summer.
Netflix or movie theater?
Netflix.
Window or aisle seat?
Aisle seat.
Morning person or night owl?
Morning.
And so, what is something you cannot do?
Wow. I am not good administratively. I need somebody keeping an eye on me at all times. I can do what I have to do. I've done dissertations, everything, but my gracious, it's a
Yeah, you've got the energy
sometimes.
and the drive to go, and somebody has to.
I want to do people stuff, and I want to go achieve things, and
Yeah.
I'm really praying somebody's got some of that other stuff covered for me.
Well, Gary, where can our audience find you if they want to connect and learn more?
Obviously, I'm on LinkedIn under W. Gary Wilson, and I'm constantly working on that, working with some folks to even revamp that today. I'm on Facebook as W. Gary Wilson, and I'm also, they can reach me at my email is wgarywilson@gmail right now. And
excellent.
I'd be glad to talk to them there.
Yeah. Thank you for your time, Gary, and to our audience for your attention. If you or someone you know wants to write a book, you can find my contact info in my LinkedIn profile, and there's actually a link to schedule a strategy session with me. You've been watching Masters of Influence with Nancy Erickson. See you next time.